The RPG Cave's mana is fueled by patrons at patreon.com/YumiCapri, and we want to say thank you to everyone for all of their support, including our Capremium producers, Dallas Ford, Drew Agnew from the House of Mario podcast, Jace Baldridge from twitch.tv/Baka Ridge, Lee Navarro, the fearless leader of the Phoenix Overdrive Extra Life team, and Jonathan Brown over at youtube.com/GamingPurpleMonkey. Our platinum producers, Brian Scott, Robbie Miller, and Trucker Sloth. Our gold members, Argo, Brendan Myers, Dallas Robbins, Emily O'Kelly, Heather Boney, James Johnson, Joel Brooks, Jose Jimenez, Mac Time, Benji Kong, Marcus O'Neill, RJ Kern, Dano, Skinny Matt, and Xavier Reyes. Thank you all for all of your support. Now, on with the show. Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the second level of the RPG Cave. I am your level 99 Archmage, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined alongside the level 99 Elf Ranger, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing today?
Hello, how's it going? I'm doing very well. I'm drinking this coffee that I actually got locally, and it's literally the best coffee ever, and I'm so glad I have it.
Literally the best? There's no other coffee that's better anywhere in the world, Garret?
Exactly, just like in Elf the movie, how he screamed out saying, "This is the best coffee in this coffee shop." This is exactly what I'm declaring now. I'm pronouncing.
I've never seen Elf, so I don't know exactly. I don't get the reference, but I'm sure many people are actually normal human beings.
It's a hilarious bit. It's a hilarious bit.
It's a time and place thing. I think I was a little bit too old when Elf came out. So
gotcha.
I never actually went around and see. Whereas I know, like, most people that are younger than me, like, even if you wouldn't have gotten taken to go to the theater to go see it, you would have seen it in school. Like, they would have, like, wheeled out the TV on the little TV stand and stuff and forced you to watch it in, like, class at some point. Whereas, I was beyond those
You're
days.
beyond that.
I mean, I'm a man beyond my years, Garret, because my gray beard, of course. This is the RPG Cave, of course, the show where we talk about RPGs all the time, except for when we talk about Elf, like right now. Let's clear the dungeon a little bit and talk about housekeeping. So first of all, our first episode went live basically today, the day we're recording this. And I want to say personally, thank you so much to everyone who reached out and gave us positive feedback about our first show. I know Garret and I were pretty proud of that episode, so I'm glad most of you guys had a chance to enjoy it. Of course, if you haven't seen it yet, it's on free feeds. I actually included all the links to all the free feeds in the show notes this time around. So if you want to subscribe to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, if you only listen to us on Patreon, all the links are all in the show notes for that this week. So definitely check us out there. Also, we need your help over on YouTube, youtube.com/gobbledygook. It's a giant mess of characters, Garret, and I'm not going to try and pronounce it. So it's in the show notes as well. Once we hit 100 subscribers, we will be able to get our custom URL, which will just be youtube.com/theRPGCave. So please, I encourage you guys, even if you're just going to listen to us on the auto feeds, please subscribe to us on YouTube. It really helps the show grow. Definitely, it goes a long way to helping us out. So definitely do that.
Hit that subscribe button.
Exactly. Also, you can leave us some feedback on the podcast services of choice, because that'll also help the show get discovered. Like on Apple Podcasts, you can leave us a review. If you leave us a review, Garret and I will read the review and talk about it on the show. So definitely,
of course,
you can go do that on Apple Podcasts. Last but not least, if you want early access to this show, as well as many of our other shows over on the Yumi and Capri Patreon, patreon.com/YumiCapri, throw a little tip in the old tip jar, and you will get content. Content will come out. It'll be like, it's like a little turnstile or a vending machine. You put a dollar in, and podcast content comes out. It's very exciting. So head on over to Patreon and leave us with that. And now, Garret, let's read from the sacred texts. It's time for our topic du jour this week. I mean, we got to go fancy, right? That's how we do it here on the
very,
RPG
very
Cave.
fancy. The Elder Scrolls. We're getting blinded right now.
Whoa. We don't want to get sued here, Garret, for copyright infringement, okay? We don't want to go that far. But this week, our big topic is our favorite RPG soundtracks. Of course, music plays a huge part in any kind of RPG, especially like long RPGs, because you spend so much time with the music in that game to the point where sometimes you'll be humming in your head outside of the game and stuff like that. So we wanted to kind of honor our favorite soundtracks of all time. Not only that, but we actually opened this up to the community. So we actually got a lot of community feedback as to what some of their favorite RPGs are. But before we get into our discussion, Garrett, I wanted to bring in Hobby1K at Hobby1K on Twitter, and they asked an interesting question that I wanted to get your opinion on before we start talking about this. Will you listen to a game's music before playing the game? I know some people would rather hear the music for the first time when it is played in the game. Personally, hearing some of the game music early has been some of the nudge needed to play some games. So Garrett, do you actually ever listen to RPG soundtracks at all, like outside of the game itself? And if so, do you ever hear it before the game, before playing one?
So yeah, that's a very interesting question. I don't normally do that. I always look at gameplay first and see what the game is. I think that's first and foremost. But now that I'm thinking about it, like listening to other soundtracks that outside I played, like Final Fantasy VII Remake is the prime example. I hear the music in the previews. I hear the music in the demos, and it's fantastic. And I want to go to Spotify and just subscribe and just listen to that soundtrack. So there are rare few exceptions to that, but I don't actually go to the music first. I always look at the demos and previews, but music is always an essential key component to the game. If it's a great music, it's going to set the atmosphere really nice in the game. So yeah, that's what I think about it.
Okay. Yeah. As for me, to answer your question, Hobby, I actually don't listen to the soundtrack before playing the game. And it's not because I want to get immersed in the game or anything like that. I think it's just a matter of, I'm the type of person that when a new RPG comes out and if the trailers won me over, I'm usually going to go play it faster than the soundtrack goes up on something like Spotify, right? Like it's not too often we get RPG soundtracks accessible to us before the game comes out, especially here in North America. It's different in Japan because a lot of times you'll get them on like CD or digital platforms in Japan much quicker than the game comes out in Japan because it's a whole they kind of roll things out a bit differently there. But for us in North America, it's harder for us to do that. So naturally, I usually don't do that. However, I'm going to throw this out that sometimes if music from a specific RPG will pop up in a different game that I'm playing that maybe I missed out on, that might attract me to play the game. For example, a game like Persona 3 Dancing in Moonlight was a game that I played that dancing game before playing Persona 3. Because I had missed it on the PlayStation 2. So hearing the music in that game inspired me to go play Persona 3 on PS2. It made me go hunt down a copy of FES
that's really cool.
And actually go play it that way. So there are definitely exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, definitely, I don't listen to RPG soundtracks before playing the game. Because I'm usually getting to the game first before I listen to it. That said, though, I listen to RPG soundtracks all the time because I actually, again, since I edit a lot of our shows for UB Capri, I'm usually always listening to music while I'm editing, and it's usually always music without vocals. And the best way to do that is a lot of times JRPG soundtracks or just RPG soundtracks in general. So I actually will go to Spotify and load up, one of the soundtracks we're going to talk about today and listen to that while I'm doing other things. And that's,
you make a good point with Persona. Like, there's a lot of music that I've listened to before the game, right? All the intro themes and stuff like that. That I listed that music before I play the game. Yeah. But that does set up a good tone.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, or if you've ever played Catherine from the Persona team as well, where like if you go to the jukebox in the bar, it's like it's got a bunch of songs from Catherine, but it's like all Persona music in there too. So it's like very easy to kind of fall down the rabbit hole of just, listening to the music while going into the Stray Sheep and kind of walking around talking to people. So that's where I got exposed to a lot of that music, and it actually inspired me to play other games. But that situation doesn't come up too often because of just the nature of the beast. I mean, I'm still waiting for the Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers soundtrack to eventually hit Spotify. One of these days, Soken, you're going to put that soundtrack on there, and it's going to be amazing. But so we're going to move on from there. And Garrett, let's talk about our favorite soundtracks. So would you like to go first, or would you like me to go first?
We're
gonna maybe do like one and one kind of back and forth kind of thing.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think this is pretty like current but timeless as well. I'll go first. I've been playing a game that we're gonna be talking about later in the future, of course, on my Retro Pocket. I'm playing Chrono Trigger, and let me tell you, that soundtrack, it blew me away.
It's real good.
Oh my goodness! Like I never thought an SNES soundtrack could like really like sound like that. Like it's so eerie. It's so like there all the songs in there perfectly fits the tone of what is in the atmosphere. I think one song that really caught me was The Secrets of the Forest. When you're actually going through the forest before you head to the kingdom or whatever, it reminds me of Studio Ghibli music. Just a long drawn out emotional music. You can hear like the lighter tones in there. And it's everywhere too. In Chrono Trigger, it's like there's not one bad song in that whole whole playlist of songs in there.
And I love too, just the music is just so varied from each other as well, depending on what location you're in or like the time period. Like each of the songs in a specific time period have like almost like a musical theme that are associated with them. That kind of go along with it. So as you're listening to the soundtrack just outside of the game, it almost feels like you're traveling through time, like you're traveling through time in the game. And it's just really a really interesting soundtrack. Again, it's done by Yasunori Mitsuda and Uematsu, actually famously from the Final Fantasy series, did a few tracks on it. But it's mostly Matsuda-san who mostly did the music in that game. And yeah, I have to echo that with you. Like, Chrono Trigger is one of my very favorite SNES soundtracks of all time. It's still one that definitely holds up today. When I hear orchestral themes of some of the songs, I don't know what it is about them, but they almost feel a little bit less special to me. I don't know what
they just hit a little bit off.
Yeah, I think that it just, in the moment of listening to it, just on the SNES itself, I just think it sounds much better or just, evokes those themes so much better than maybe like an orchestra is able to capture. So maybe it's just part of the special sauce of playing it on the SNES version. But yeah, Chrono Trigger is one that was kind of one of my honorable mentions on this list, partially because I kind of knew you were going to pick this one and I wanted to make sure we both didn't pick the same one. But I mean, Chrono Trigger, that's like a duh. Like a slam dunk. Like, of course you're going to pick. Of course, we're going to have Chrono Trigger on this list. I mean, it would be impossible for us not to. Well, next up, I'm going to actually go with one I just mentioned a few minutes ago. Final Fantasy XIV. Now, I had to think about it for a bit because I was telling Garrett off air that I wanted to make sure to only pick one soundtrack per franchise. And of course, Final Fantasy is a series that is just littered with amazing soundtracks, and you kind of can't go wrong with picking one soundtrack over the other. So I had to really think to myself, okay, what is my favorite soundtrack from the Final Fantasy series just in general? And I had to go with 14. And I mean, when I say 14, I have to include all the expansions when I talk about it, because I mean, they all played into the same game essentially, even though they all have their different themes and musical styles depending on which expansion you're playing. I mean, Matsuyoshi Soken really just knocks it out of the park with the music in that game, of course. He's an incredible composer. It's crazy that he actually isn't doing more soundtracks for Square Enix, although we haven't gotten official confirmation that he's doing the soundtrack for 16. I'm fairly certain from that opening trailer that he's actually doing the soundtrack for 16, which is awesome. And just, there are so many amazing tracks to choose from Final Fantasy XIV, from the Shadowbringers main theme to the Edge boss fight from Shadowbringers, where you fight the Warrior of Light towards the end of the game, to even Hard to Miss, which is probably my favorite track, which is just one of the Fate battle themes. Essentially, Fates are kind of these open world events that happen in Final Fantasy XIV, and they have different Fate themes depending on where you are in the world. And Hard to Miss is one of the very first ones you hear. It's just this amazing set of like guitars and string music and synthesis music. There's just all kinds of really awesome, so can really just blend so many different genres together and then just mashes them all together and somehow it just all fits. Not only that, but many of these tracks also have like these like choir vocals and stuff too, and cool. He mixes them with these really like different musical themes that you really wouldn't expect to go with like choir vocals, but it just works.
Now, is it all orchestral, like music, like through and through with
Some
Final
of it
Fantasy
is.
14?
There's some orchestral music where some of it is just like, it just sounds like it's rock music with like guitars
Yeah.
and drums and bass and stuff. It really just depends on the type of boss you're fighting. And again, sometimes
Okay.
Soken will sometimes mix and match. So like certain bosses, for example, will have certain phases, and each phase of the boss fight will have a different theme associated with it. And that theme can change. Like, for example, with the boss Titan, it starts kind of like this like rock riff with basically like bass pedals and just the guitars just solo. And then the next phase, for example, will bring in the bass guitar in addition to the bass drum and the guitar. And then the third theme will bring in some orchestral singing with some string instruments like violins.
It's like to
and
mash
stuff.
everything together.
Yeah, and then the fourth and final phase just mashes all of those elements together and not only that, but has these like rock vocals going along with it. It's so good. It's so masterful.
I bet that composer's having a great time with like Final Fantasy doing all these different, I don't know, like different instruments and like different themes. And like I hear Final Fantasy VII Remake music, it's a lot of orchestral, but then you hear some guitar, it's just so crazy that they could just try to blend everything together into one just like massive piece like that.
Yeah, it's this giant hodgepodge of musical styles that just all works in the context of playing the game. And it just, again, when I go into certain boss fights, I get like pumped up just listening to the music. I'm like, yes, I'm ready to kill this boss. This is so fun. So yeah, Final Fantasy XIV, especially with the type of game it is, being an MMO, it's so easy to just kind of tune the music out because you're playing the game for so long. But even 40,000 hours into the game where I am now with Final Fantasy XIV, I still love the music for Final Fantasy XIV, and I will listen to it even outside the game.
That's some good music.
So it has to be a pretty dang good soundtrack to do that. So I definitely have to put that as kind of my first spot here on my favorite soundtracks list. Like Final Fantasy XIV's music, so good. It's all on Spotify too, except for Shadowbringers. It's gonna get there one day. So I will come over there and make you put it on there, of course. So good. Plus Endwalker 2, where just the best part about Endwalker is you may be getting a game, but you're essentially buying the soundtrack to Endwalker, and then the game kind of comes along with it. So there you go. I'm very excited about that this November. But Garrett,
I'm excited for you. Yes.
What is your next choice, my friend?
All right. Well, my next choice is actually one of my favorite RPGs as well. And it's actually made by a smaller developer who made the game Hades and also Bastion. Supergiant Games. I'm talking about actually Transistor. And it's actually one of my higher favorite RPGs getting into the PS4. Great smaller RPG, but that soundtrack is really good. It really fits the tone. So Transistor is like more of a futuristic kind of sci-fi type of story. And the composer, it's Darren Korb. He actually does a lot of the music in Supergiant Games. He does a really good job of fixing a lot of the beats and tones of sci-fi music. The main character, Red, she's a singer. And she actually lost her voice during the game, and she's trying to reclaim that voice throughout the game. But she can hum still, and she hums with the tones of each of the songs if you hold down like one of the triggers or whatever, and it's really nice. There's a bunch of amazing like great songs by Ashley Barrett. She is actually the voice for Red during these songs as well. I really go out and search it up on Spotify, go through the whole soundtrack. It's not that long. It's like probably it's maximum of it's an hour and 12 minutes. Like
and the game's shorter
short.
naturally, so of course the soundtrack doesn't need to be as expansive as some of these other games we're talking about too.
But there's some amazing songs in there, like In Circles, and also what was another one that We All Become. We All Become is a very very good song.
That's what we would refer to in the business as a banger, Garrett. Let me tell you.
As a banger.
That's a banger. That song is real good. Real good.
Yeah. So that's my next.
Transistor's a really good choice, man. I actually hadn't even thought about that one because I don't really traditionally think of that as like a traditional RPG, but it definitely is an RPG. And just even from the opening minutes of the very first trailer from that game, I was like, this game's gonna have amazing music when I played it. Yeah. And I was not disappointed when playing the full game. Like, it really just plays into, again, like you said, the character itself, and kind of her being a singer just it plays into the musical styles with the game just so much. So yeah, Transistor, a great choice. I love the music in Transistor as well, and like Supergiant just totally nailed it with that one. And they've always had really good music in all their games.
They
too,
have
like
great music.
Bastion's got a really good soundtrack as well. I haven't played Hades, but I hear the music's good in that game. And then even in something like Pyre, I think had a really good soundtrack too. So
yeah. Darren Korb does a very good job. Yeah,
they do good work over there. All right, next up, I'm going to go with a soundtrack that, again, from a long-running series that you can't really go wrong picking music from any one of these games. And I know, Garrett, you're going to probably talk about one of these at some point, too. Persona 3 Portable is my choice from the Persona series. Again, it's hard to go wrong with any of the Persona soundtracks, but
that's so true.
But again, listening to the music from Persona 3 in Dancing in Moonlight really got me excited to play the game because the music is just so good from that game. And Persona 3 Portable, of the 3 Persona versions, the reason why I go with that one over the original soundtrack or the FES soundtrack is because you have the 2 playable protagonists in Persona 3. You have the male and female main characters, and depending on the character you select, it changes the music for the entire game based on which character you play. So like the open world theme, for example, is a different song, and the battle theme is a completely different song. You have some songs that kind of cross over between both versions, but depending on which character you select, it thematically feels different between the two of them from the music perspective, which I just really loved. So the music itself, of course, you've got music from Lotus Juice, of course, who's like a Japanese rapper. He does music for a lot of the Persona games. But you've also got the vocal stylings of Yumi Kamakura as well. She does an amazing job with some of the vocal tracks in the game. And then just Shoji Meguro does a lot of the overworld themes and stuff like that, and mostly does all of the instrumental themes in that game. And my favorite song from the game is Way of Life, which is kind of like the female kind of open world theme where you're going from place to place. It's just this like very like uppity, like kind of positive song, which is kind of different from a lot of the music in Persona 3 because you've got a lot of darker themes in Persona 3 just as a game itself. It's very different from some of the other Persona games from a lot of the different themes perspectives. And I love just kind of the infusion of a lot of electronic music with the rap from Lotus Juice from a lot of the tracks in this game. So yeah, Persona 3 Portable, definitely my pick for the Persona series. Again, just like Final Fantasy, a very tough choice because I mean all of them are great. I mean, obviously, I would say maybe the PS1 versions of Persona 1 and 2 are kind of lacking behind the rest of them. But when they did the remakes on PSP, they redid all the music for those games too, and all that like redone music is fantastic.
They do a really good job with their music. Then, if they just uplift the first 2 games with, they take really good care of them.
I mean, that's the reason why we see like the Persona concert series in Japan every year because like there's so much good music from all the Persona games, and just seeing them on stage, like I think that's such a unique experience. Like between that or even going to the Final Fantasy concert Distant Worlds, like it's one thing to listen to the music when you're listening to it just on your own in your house, but then going to see that live is just such a different experience.
I bet.
And I mean, that's one of the things that, like if I ever go back to Japan, that's one of the things I want to do is like whenever, the world opens up again and we can go to like the Persona concert series again. Like I want to go to Japan and go see it.
That'd be crazy. I think I remember watching a live stream of, I think it's Persona 5. I think they were doing Strikers or something like that, but they had a live stream sometime last year and I was watching like a good 3 or 4 hours. They go for a very long time. In those concerts.
It's like over a couple days. They do like this giant festival. It's like Woodstock or something like that, but it's all Persona music. And they like reunite all of the singers. They reunite all the singers from the original Persona games as well. So it's not just Persona 5 where they do in these concerts. It's like all the music across all the games, which is just amazing to see. So yeah, that's one of my bucket list things to do is to go see that. In fact, while we're on the subject, Garrett, have you really seen like any video game concerts at all yourself? Or do you really go to concerts?
Not really.
No?
Well, I used to go, but now the pandemic and everything. But no, I haven't specifically went to a video game concert.
Oh, okay. Because I've been to a couple. Because I've been to Distant Worlds and seen the Final Fantasy music played in person. But also, this is kind of non-RPG related. But one of the last concerts I went to before the pandemic started was the Legend of Zelda live
I
live
bet that
concert.
was so cool.
It was amazing. Getting to see kind of themes across all of the different games. I've actually been to that twice because I went to it one year when the year that Majora's Mask, the remaster version came out.
Yes.
And they had like a big, like 20-minute medley at the end of the show that was like all of the songs across Majora's Mask, which was cool. And then once again in 2019 with like to celebrate Breath of the Wild and all of the music from that game. So yeah, it was so cool. So there you go. That's my second pick. Garrett, what is your third RPG pick, my friend?
I'm going to continue the Persona train because I do love Persona music so much. And I wish I do have Persona 3 Dancing in Moonlight, but I just need to get to it. I just haven't gone really dive deep into the music of that. But what I'm going to choose and what inspired me to like listen to this music all the time is actually Persona 4 Dancing All Night.
Okay.
That is probably the first time I was like, oh, wow, the Persona music is really, really good. And the remixes of the songs are even better. And so I think I got like the special edition, whatever version on Vita. And then I got the soundtrack. And then I popped in that soundtrack into my car and listened to that constantly in loops and road trips. And it has like all the remixes and all the original music in there. I'm thinking of like a lot of famous songs in there, like Juna's theme. I really enjoy it. It's very happy and upbeat as well.
It's just so different from everything else from in the Persona games too, which is just what makes it stand out.
Yeah. I love the remixes of Heartbreak. I remember Sean Capri used to put that song at the end of Yumi and Capri. Yeah. And then also Backside of the TV remix is very good as well. It's like kind of like a kind of battle music, kind of spooky in a way. And of course Lotus Juice does a very good job of adding more rap and more lyrics into those remixes. I could listen to that soundtrack constantly. It's so good.
It's so good. And in fact, across all of the dancing games, regardless of which one you're playing, like all of those remixes, like the Persona 5 remixes that they did for Dancing in Starlight and then the Dancing in Moonlight themes from Persona 3, all of them are amazing. Like they did put so much care into doing those remixes. And Persona 4 Dancing All Night is actually a really interesting choice. I mean, I'd expected that maybe you might pick Persona 4 Golden, for example, but I think you get kind of all the best. You get the best of both worlds with the Dancing All Night soundtrack because it's not just remixes. You've also got some of the original themes in there too as well. And yeah, the music in that game is top notch, and it all kind of plays into the story in that game too. Because I mean, for most people that haven't played it, it's like a story continuation of Persona 4 as well. Like it goes past the main credits, and all of the themes that are in some of those remixes kind of work their way into the themes in that you're experiencing in that story mode, which I thought was really interesting as well with Dancing All Night. So that's a game that I know people just don't give it a try because it's a dancing game, and that's like a turnoff for people. But yeah, it's really, 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 really good. And if you're listening to this and you haven't checked that music out, definitely check it out. I think the soundtrack for that's on Spotify as well, so you can definitely go listen to it there as well.
All the Persona music is on Spotify. It's actually kind of tricky to search it up.
Well, the best way I found to find it was to search Lotus Juice because his name's in English on Spotify because the other like artists' names are in Japanese, like they're in kanji essentially. So you can't really search them easily. But if you search for Lotus Juice and then go to the appears on section, just almost all the soundtracks are there, and then you can kind of like link to them from the other soundtracks once you find one of them.
So the playlist, the profile that actually licensed the official music is Annie playlist. So ANI playlist. That has all the Persona official music in there.
Just so much Persona. You could listen to it all day.
And all the anime music, really.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Next up, my third choice is going outside the world of JRPGs because we've been talking a lot about JRPGs. Yeah. Well, I mean, Transistor's not JRPG either, but Mass Effect 2 is my next choice. This is actually from Jacques Wall. It's a very it's more of a traditional soundtrack versus some of the other ones we've been talking about, where it's a lot of orchestral music, but you've also got a lot of synth beats in there as well. And just some notable music to me is like, where, for example, the Afterlife theme, when you're going to the bar on Omega for the very first time, it's got this really cool like dance beat in the background that just sticks in the back of my mind every time I think about that game. It's always there. And it's one of the very first pieces of music you actually hear in that game. But Garrett, the suicide mission theme at the end of the game, where you're doing kind of the final mission in Mass Effect 2, amazing. Like it's this amazing like orchestral piece that's put together, and it kind of rivals some of my other favorite orchestral video game soundtracks, like Halo, for example. That it kind of reminds me of a lot of those soundtracks, and it's just epic in every single way. And it, of course, just coincides with one of the most epic moments in any video game I've played, whereas the suicide mission, the last hour of Mass Effect 2, is just incredible, and the music that goes along with it just permeates through that whole journey that you go on when you're fighting the collectors at the end of the game. So definitely, nice. I'd have to say the suicide mission definitely is my favorite track, but again, just a lot of really cool like sci-fi themes that you kind of hear throughout the game. It really is like, it's almost more of your traditional space opera soundtrack, but it feels almost old school in a lot of ways as well. Like it feels kind of retro. It feels like it's trying to evoke like the themes of some like 70s sci-fi as well, or 80s sci-fi, as you're going from place to place, in addition with like some more modern orchestral stuff, and it kind of blends those two together. So Mass Effect 2 is my choice. It was definitely out of most Western RPGs, probably my top pick as far as any of those, because I love the music in all the Mass Effect games, but definitely Mass Effect 2 I think stands out with, especially again with the suicide theme music, and then some of the other tracks I think kind of stand head to toe over some of the other soundtracks. From Mass Effect 1 is probably a close runner-up, but then Mass Effect 3 has some good music, but it's just not as high for me for whatever reason.
Gotcha. I definitely need to play those games.
One day, Garrett.
This year. I think it's going to come to Game Pass like later this year. Hopefully,
I
at
think
least
so
the
too.
first one. Yeah. So it'll be pretty soon. So for me, I'll stick on the Western RPG train here, and actually, I'm going to mention an MMO, The Elder Scrolls Online.
Interesting choice.
Yeah. So I was debating between which Elder Scrolls game I really want to pick, because it was Skyrim or Oblivion or Elder Scrolls Online. And when I was going through the soundtrack of Elder Scrolls Online, they do a fantastic job of fitting all of the orchestral pieces into the environment. It's so, and there's so much content in there as well, from like I feel like it just fits to each and every environment, and then also. I'm not sure. It's more environmental music, just like Skyrim. I don't know what else to say about that, but like I think that's what the best part about it is with these kind of soundtracks is like it kind of blends in.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but it does something similar to what we were talking about with Chrono Trigger, where each area kind of has its own theme, but it has multiple music tracks per area, but they all kind of have like this similar musical theme in each area. And then as you go from area to area, you kind of get the music changes along with it to reflect the area you're in. So again, it's more like music that's in the background, like you stated, like you're not thinking about like vocal tracks or anything like that, but it's very much, but it's telling the story of each location through the music, which I think is
exactly. Cool. Yeah. And it's just, it's not music that you kind of like need to listen to, but it's more like very environmental. And also it's great study music. Like you could just go into Spotify or YouTube or whatever, and I just listen to those type of soundtracks and just study or do something else. It's very good. A couple of songs that like really pop out for me for Elder Scrolls Online is Watchman's Ease from Oblivion, and also North Point Nocturne. Those were the huge standouts out of the hundreds of songs that are in Elder Scrolls Online.
And then with each new expansion, you've got even more songs too, like kind of what I talked about with Final Fantasy XIV, where each one has like its own like themes and stuff associated with it too, which is really interesting as well.
But yeah, I just really want to highlight this game just because they, just like Final Fantasy XIV, they take a very great care or great job at their music. It's like, okay, we're adding this expansion. How do we make sure the player is like really enhanced with this music that's surrounding this environment? So
Yeah, and a lot of the music I was listening to while playing the Elder Scrolls Online as well, because I played it for a good while as well. I mean, I never got sick of it. I never turned it off or anything like that. It just, goes along with, what you're doing and stuff like that. It gets the job done, and it definitely is done with care. So that's a good choice. And again, out of all the Elder Scrolls soundtracks, again, I'm probably in agreement with you that that's probably the strongest one.
Yeah.
I mean, not just from the breadth of music, but also just the music quality itself, I think, is probably a little bit better than even something like Skyrim. Whereas I know a lot of people might take offense to that because they like the main kind of Skyrim theme. But beyond the main Skyrim theme, I think that the music itself didn't really stand out to me in the same way that Elder Scrolls Online.
It does feel kind of samey. And the same thing for Elder Scrolls Online too. There's a lot of samey music, but that's just great music that I just put in the background as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Next up for me, I'm going to circle back to one of the things you talked about at the very beginning, Garrett. And I'm going to talk about a Chrono game, but the other Chrono game. I'm going to talk about Chrono Cross. And for those that didn't know, the composer for this game is actually Matsuda-san again from Chrono Trigger, actually did all the music from Chrono Cross as well, which is why you actually have a lot of the same themes. Because in this game, in Chrono Cross, it's not a time travel game. You're actually traveling between two different realities. Essentially, one reality where the main character lives, and then the other reality where the main character died when he was a child, essentially. And the world is a very different place in both these realms. So as a result, you'll be going to some of the same areas in each world, but the theme for that area will be different depending on which world you're in. So as you go through it, like one will be like the one this one town will have like an upbeat theme in the world where the character is alive, but in the other world it'll be like this like sad like melodramatic music, and it's so different between both the worlds, and again just totally highlights all the themes from that game, and I love it to death from the opening music to the kind of the open world theme for the other world. I think that's incredible. The song I love the most though, The Girl Who Stole the Stars, which is kind of this like sad theme where you kind of learn about some of the similarities between Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross that again I'm not going to spoil for people that haven't played it. The music that you kind of listen to there kind of evokes a lot of themes and musical stylings from the original Chrono Trigger, but then mixes them with the style of Chrono Cross, and it's a theme that basically kind of bridges both games together. Both games that I actually love. So that song itself is really amazing, and just there are so many great tracks on the Chrono Cross soundtrack. It's huge. It's like 4 CDs long, so there's just so much music to choose from. And again, you're hearing a lot of the same type of themes that you would hear in Chrono Trigger, but it's not done in the like chiptune style that you get from Chrono Trigger. But at the same time, it's not orchestral music either. It's more like electronic themes versions of. It's
definitely that PS1 music type of blends. Yeah,
exactly. Like it's kind of like almost like this MIDI music that's like bridging the gap between the PS1 era and more orchestral stuff. So Chrono Cross, the music itself, slam dunk for me. It's so good. It's almost as good as the Chrono Trigger music, I would argue. So definitely check that out. Again, it's on Spotify as well as the Chrono Trigger soundtrack. So you can definitely go there. We're going to mention Spotify a lot in this episode, I feel. There's so much good music there. Well, Garrett, this round is out to the end of our list. Garrett, what is your 5th choice for our top 10 RPG soundtracks?
There's a few, like last few games that I want to mention, but I guess the last one for this list.
Because we'll talk about honorable mentions afterwards. So
yeah, that sounds good. I've been playing this game recently, and hopefully I'm almost done with the first part of it. Nier Automata.
That's a good one.
I think that soundtrack is the most unique soundtrack I've heard in a video game. Like really ever. It's very obscure, just like how it fits with the game. I guess like darker tones. There's a lot of vocals with it. I love how every time you like go in between areas, the music kind of just shifts ever so slightly. Sometimes you get like some instruments when you go like into the center of these certain areas, but as you go out, it fades. and like it's really cool to see like in the circus kind of carnival area, you go inside, you can hear the vocals, you can hear everything around you, but once you start getting outside of there, it kind of fades off and try to transitions to another one. So it does a very good job of doing that. And also when you get into battles, it gets your heart racing, gets your heart pumping with the vocals and everything. Nier Automata, the one thing that really stuck out to me other than the combat is the music. It's just a really nice job of blending it into that game for sure.
Yeah, and it's just like we've talked about, like with some of our other entries, it's just so varied depending on what area of the game you're in and stuff. Like I love kind of the open, like when you're in the kind of the open world and it's got like that's like really like almost like positive music. But then when you do some of the boss fights, it's like it just goes all over the place.
So dark.
Yeah,
I love it.
Especially like the carnival area, like the music in there is just like it's just so different from like everything else in the game, and like that's one of like the most memorable areas in the game for me personally because of the music. So, or even just some of the later themes too, like when you're fighting some of the robots towards the end of 2B's ending, just some of the music towards the end of her campaign, just really interesting stuff. So yeah, Nier Automata, fantastic choice, Garrett. I mean, I don't know if I could have got any better myself. So my final choice might actually feel a little bit disappointing, but I'm actually going to swing this all the way back to where we began with the Super Nintendo, because I gotta throw this one in here as well. Now this game actually got a remake last year, but I'm actually gonna go with the soundtrack from the original version of the game, Trials of Mana, which is the sequel to Secret of Mana. The music in this game is actually done by Hiroki Kikuta, and the music itself in this game, just like Chrono Trigger is very varied depending on the areas you're going into, and just has some great like memorable music from top to bottom. And one of the things I actually loved about the remake of Trials of Mana that came out last year is you can actually play it with the SNES soundtrack version versus the orchestral soundtrack. And it kind of goes to back to what I was talking about with Chrono Trigger, where I don't know what it is about the orchestral version of that music, but it's not as timeless to me as the original version, if that makes any sense. I
guess that's just kind of consistent. Yeah, when these composers think of, these 8-bit music, I feel like it's just much different types of like mentally what kind of beats they could do compared to an orchestral version. Whereas our orchestral version from the ground up, of course, it's going to be like a masterpiece of some kind. But if you try to transition from 8-bit to orchestral, I can see why people would have a tough time.
If anything, they make it more overly complicated thematically with the music than you were trying to get across in the original game. And I just don't think it hits the same way as some of the original themes. Some of my favorite songs from that are Where the Angels Feared to Tread, which is kind of like the song from the very beginning of the game. But then the final boss fight in that game has 3 different phases for the boss fight, and it has 3 different distinct themes for each phase. And the third part, Sacrifice Part 3, is this like 9-minute like tour de force track that just goes on, and it has so many ups and downs to the track itself. It's really incredible what Kikuta-san did with the music for that game. So definitely check that one out. I love the music for Trials of Mana. It's amazing. That's the soundtrack I was listening to for so long before we got the North American version of that game, because I had actually played it before it came here. I actually have like an import copy of the game that I played back in the day. But yeah, the music for that game, really solid. Even and it is across the Mana series as well, because he actually did the music for all of the Mana games from Secret of Mana to some of the later titles as well, like Legend of Mana and stuff like that. So definitely check that one out. I love that one a lot. So Garrett, real quick, what are some of your honorable mentions that we didn't get a chance to talk about on our main list here?
So I want to mention a few of them for the Pokemon franchise. I still think Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, the original tunes of that, and it's kind of nostalgic to me, but I feel like they did a very good job of the capabilities at the time with Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Probably the best soundtrack out of the Fire Emblem franchise is actually, or what I've played of, is Fire Emblem Echoes, the Shadows of Valencia remake on the 3DS. Take a look at that soundtrack, man, because I think it's a standout compared to the rest of the modern Fire Emblem games there. Another game I want to mention that's a smaller RPG that came out last year, Other Side. Ever heard of this?
I've never heard of this game.
So it's on Xbox and PC, but it's a strategy RPG, a roguelite, where you just kind of like go through or whatever. But like they have 2 or 3 great songs in there that reminds me of like a cover band for 3 Days Grace. Like it's actually really, really cool. And then I want to mention the Disgaea franchise in general. I feel like the music there is so wacky, so upbeat, so jazzy, it's very different than the emotional dark music you hear all the time in RPGs. That one is like, this is fun. This is fun music.
It totally fits with like the theme of those games, like the style where they're just such goofy games, and it's got like this really goofy music that goes along with it. Yeah, that's a really good choice too. Like I really love that. Even though again, that's not the type of soundtrack I would probably listen to outside the game, but like in the context of while you're playing the game, like I love it. It's great.
Yes. Yeah. So those are my honorable mentions.
Very nice. As for me, kind of my honorable mentions are The Legend of Dragoon on PS1. Really fantastic soundtrack. Again, a lot of like traditional fantasy stuff, but I think all of it's really well done. Especially like the main, the very first theme you hear, If You Still Believe, which is like this really cool vocal track during the first cutscene, I think is fantastic. So definitely got to give props to that game. A newer game, Indivisible. This is like really cool turn-based RPG. And some of the music of that game was really fantastic. And it was also done by the same composer I talked about before, Kakuta-san, who did the Secret of Mana soundtracks as well. So he actually did the music for that game, and it's really fantastic. I love it. Another modern game that a lot of people might have missed, but it's on Game Pass, Crosscode. Actually has a fantastic soundtrack as well. That one is almost like it takes place like in this pseudo MMO. So you actually have like an MMO like soundtrack with that game, but it's all done in 16-bit stylings. So it's got a really good soundtrack along with it. And then of course I have to throw this in here, even though I said I wouldn't pick another Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy VII Remake soundtrack.
Of course,
we would be remiss if we didn't mention it somewhere in here. And the last one before I go to user questions as well. Octopath Traveler, I think, has an amazing soundtrack as well.
Of course.
And I love just all the different themes for all the different characters. Just the battle theme, too, just plays in my head as I talk about that game. Such a good soundtrack for that game. And I'm so glad I have the collector's edition that comes with the soundtrack, too, because I listen to it a lot. So there you go. So let's let some of the community in with us as well. Let's party up. So here are some of the ones we heard from our community. We'll start with Fluxay, who says Chrono Trigger is his favorite soundtrack.
Of course.
And then we got Kabosky, who says Octopath Traveler and Persona 5. Again, we didn't talk about Persona 5, but of course, just Persona 5, amazing soundtrack.
Amazing soundtrack, of course.
Just this like amazing jazzy soundtrack. It's so good. Seanathan, not to be confused with Sean, says Final Fantasy VII Remake. He kind of echoes what I was just talking about there. Will at Wanderous Will says Final Fantasy XIV has a stellar soundtrack. I love some of the remix songs from the older Final Fantasy games, as well as some of the original songs. Because one thing I didn't mention about the Final Fantasy XIV soundtrack is sometimes you'll face bosses from older Final Fantasy games in that game, and they will have remixed versions done in the Soken style from some of the older games, like Dancing Mad, for example. When you fight Kefka, it's like this amazing rendition of like the Final Fantasy VI boss music, or even some of the modern games, like because they did this whole Final Fantasy VIII tribute in the latest expansion. So some of the songs from that game are in there, and they're all really well done. Next up, GMAC at GMAC Production 1 says Chrono Trigger still is one of the best soundtracks ever. And there we go. Those were all of our community input, Garrett. A lot of great choices from the community. And again, kind of lines up with what we were talking about as well. There's a lot of really great RPG soundtracks. And I think we picked a good list today. Well, real quick before we party up with the remaining questions, Garrett, real quick, we should talk about Scarlet Nexus, because we both played it this week because there is a demo for it. What do you think about the demo of Scarlet Nexus, Garrett?
I think it was very well done. It's a good showpiece of what that game is going to look like. It's very fluid. It's like, one of the recent current gen console games. So it's going to look very nice. I think it's probably the best, maybe smooth looking anime looking game I've seen on a current gen console. It reminds me a lot of Astral Chain. But as you mentioned before this podcast, we're not sure if this is going to be a role-playing game specifically, just because
well, it has a lot of ties to like RPG elements. Because again, you've got kind of the tree, the brain tree that you go through to unlock your psychic powers. You've got multiple teammates, and I'm interested to see how the teammate dynamic is going to work into the game. Not only that, but you actually have the lineage of the Tales series in this game, because a lot of the developers who are working on this also worked on Tales of Vesperia was the one that they worked on. So you do have a lot of RPG ties to Scarlet Nexus. So I don't know necessarily if it fits in the RPG category. Again, well, maybe we'll save that discussion for our what defines an RPG episode in a few weeks. But Scarlet Nexus, I'm with you. I think it looks incredible. Again, you can actually see the animation from UFO Table, who is actually doing the animation for this, on all of the characters models as well, which are all these like, very cell shaded models themselves.
Yes.
And UFO Table, if people aren't familiar with them, they're one of the best Japanese studios for animation right now, especially when it comes to action scenes, because they do stuff like Demon Slayer, the Fate series, Kara no Kyokai, just so many
the Fate
amazing
series
shows.
is so good.
Or even they also did all of the cinematics for the Tales series as well. After Tales of Exilia, essentially. So definitely, I love to see their work come through, and you can definitely see it on the characters this time, because they haven't really had too much influence over some of the character models in game before. Like we really haven't seen a lot of their animation play into it. Whereas this time around, you can definitely feel like their touch on some of the characters, both the character models themselves, but also the boss designs, which I think are really interesting too. So I really enjoyed it as well. I'm really excited to see the full game at the end of next month, at the end of June. And we'll talk about that more on our RPG preview episode, which is actually next week's episode. So sneak preview for what we're going to talk about next week. So we'll be mentioning Scarlet Nexus again next week. So it's time to party up, Sean. Let's let... I don't know why I called you Sean. I'm sorry, Garrett. I'm so used to podcasting with Sean.
Used to Xbox.
It's just ingrained in my brain. I'll eventually call you by the right name eventually, Garrett. So, of course, Garrett, let's party up. Let's let some of our friends into the show with us. We're to start with Sean Capri. Maybe that was my dyslexia kind of playing into things there. So Sean Capri asks, what's a common misconception about your favorite RPG, and what would you say to dispel it? So... Garrett, is there any misconceptions the public has about one of your favorite RPGs out there?
That's Sean, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to think about this a little bit more. Ryan, do you have something on you right now, or?
The thing is, I honestly don't have one either, Sean, because I was reading Sean's question, and part of it is too, most of the circles I'm interacting with as far as public perception for a lot of the RPGs I play. I don't really hear too much about this.
I think I got something actually.
Okay, go for it.
So yeah, the Fire Emblem franchise, like at least the current games right now, I think a lot of people think of it as it's very complicated. It's very hard to play, and it's not as accessible. Which I would argue against Three Houses is the most accessible game out of the franchise. You can play in casual mode, so you can let your allies die and they'll respawn in the next game. You can get to the point in Fire Emblem Three Houses where the game you just let the game play, right? You can go turn it to baby mode. You can let it auto attack and do auto things if you want to just see the story. So yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of hesitant with Fire Emblem Three Houses just because how long it is. I understand that, but also how people like to play them as hard as they wanted to. Like me, I like to play on hard and classic. So that means permadeath. That means that the enemies are going to be tough. They're going to be punishing. But just letting you know that there are much easier difficulties in that game.
Yeah, and it's definitely very accessible. Of all the Fire Emblem games, that's the most accessible one for sure. But people don't think of it that way. Like you're right, Garrett, where it's like they look at the strategy element and they're like, nope, too complicated for me. I can't do it. It's got to be a hard game if it's a strategy game, right? But obviously that's not how that works. Of course, you and I both know that. So, and actually, while you've been talking, I kind of thought of one actually that a lot of people have, where they say an MMO can't possibly have a good story. But I would argue against that point, where there's a lot of great examples of MMOs, and two of them we talked about today. Elder Scrolls Online, I think, actually has a really good Elder Scrolls story baked into the MMO. It's not all voiced, but you do get a lot of great, voiced moments. Obviously, there is a lot of reading, but I do think if you're willing to put in a little bit of effort to kind of read some of the text boxes and stuff, I think it's actually got a really good story, and I think it's probably the best Elder Scrolls story when you actually think about.
I would tend to agree with that for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, the Skyrim story was okay. Like it had dragons, it was interesting, but it wasn't. You weren't ever playing that game for the story. And same with Oblivion.
Exactly.
Like I like the story in Oblivion, but again, that's not the reason why you're playing that. Whereas like, I actually think it's possible that you would play Elder Scrolls Online just for the story, just like. Final Fantasy XIV is another example. I would argue Final Fantasy XIV has a better story than almost every Final Fantasy game, period. And that says a lot because Final Fantasy is known for, good stories. But Final Fantasy XIV in particular tells this really amazing story across all of these expansions, and each expansion kind of feels like its own game, but it's still part of the same narrative. So it kind of takes the idea that you saw in Mass Effect, where you're taking one character across 3 games and telling this one epic story across all 3 games, but you're doing it in a way over 5 different expansions and a main game. So you basically go on this giant epic journey as the hero of light, and it tells this giant overarching story of basically the great collapse of all these different worlds, and you're fighting this like overarching enemy called the Asians, and there's a bunch of different factions and stuff, and a lot of political intrigue that really makes the story interesting. So yeah,
you're convincing me to get this game. By the way, this fun.
You would play it too much, Garrett. That's the problem because it's so. I mean, again. 40,000 hours for me played. That's where my current playtime is.
Wait, I thought you were exaggerating. Are you serious?
I wish I was exaggerating. I wish I was. It's still less than my World of Warcraft count because again, World of Warcraft is over a year of my life in World of Warcraft, Sean. I don't know why I called you Sean again. What's wrong with my brain today?
No, it's okay. I think you've had this conversation before with Sean, so I
actually have. That's maybe what I'm bringing it back. I'm sorry, Garrett. But anyway, that's enough of Sean's question. Let's move on to Fluxy's question. Fluxy asks, what is your favorite overused RPG quote? So, Garrett, I'm going to really quickly talk about mine to give you some time to think. Because my favorite overused RPG trope is choices in games. Dialogue choices are really overused in RPGs, but I can't get enough of them, Garrett. I actually love them. Again, just playing Mass Effect Legendary Edition last week, I actually loved going back to it and making all these choices that I know don't really matter, but I still love it. I love that the game gives me the freedom to kind of, play the game my way and make these dialogue choices. And sometimes it influences the story and sometimes it doesn't. And I actually really love that in RPGs. Like it almost like turning them into like your own, like choose your own adventure novel, I think is just so cool, regardless of how much they actually play into the main story. So my favorite overused RPG trope, gotta be dialogue choices. I actually really like dialogue choices in games. I'm a sucker for it.
Me too.
Even though, again, I know they're not for everyone. I like them. What about you, Garrett?
I think my favorite overused RPG trope is actually companions, parties, somewhere where we're going to have a culmination of multiple players together and you just use attack and moves. I like having variety in my RPG, so I think having other and different characters that have weaknesses and strengths adds just a simple but yet also could be very complication or layer when you go into battles. I love like talking with these companions as well, that you can give them different personalities and can work in the story very well. And you see it just all the time in RPGs. You can, I would say probably more than half easily, or 75% of RPGs have like some form of companions or kind of other characters that you control along with your main character. So that's what I'm going to go with.
Okay, that's cool. Next up, Kabosky asks, what game series would you like to see take a shot at the RPG genre? For example, like how Yakuza did with Like a Dragon. So this one's a little bit tough for me because, first of all, because of the way modern genres work, we see so many RPG elements make their way into modern games that you're already kind of seeing this type of thing. But obviously, it's a big difference between that and, what Yakuza did with Like a Dragon, because that's like very much like a Persona-like turn-based JRPG, essentially. So,
yes.
That's really interesting. So for me, one of the things I actually liked were license-based RPGs. So what came to mind when asking this question is even though we've got a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles beat 'em up game coming out soon, I would love to see a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles turn-based like JRPG style game.
Oh, Chrono Trigger like style.
You've got your 4 party members being the 4 turtles. They've got different styles. It writes itself, Garrett. Like I don't even need to come up with like a pitch for this. Like it makes so much sense. Like I'm surprised they haven't ever thought of doing like a Ninja Turtles like turn-based RPG before. It writes itself, Garrett. So that's my pick. I would love to see that. And again, I know that's like a licensed property and not like a traditional game franchise. But again, just with modern game franchises, we're already seeing them in that way. Obviously, we've already seen Mario do it. I would never probably want to see like a Zelda or Metroid turn-based RPG. Like to me, that would be kind of weird, especially because we don't really have too many characters. Because in those games, we're so centralized with the main character, we don't really have like side characters that fight alongside either Samus or Link. So those didn't really make any sense to me. So that's why for me, I'd have to go with like a licensed RPG, almost like kind of like what BioWare did with Sonic on the DS, like doing something like that, but then with like the Ninja Turtles, I would think would be cool. What about you, Garrett? What do you think about this question?
I actually went back and remember a game that was in development for the Vita, but they dropped it. I didn't think it was like more of a rumor or whatever, but a BioShock.
Oh, yes. When Ken Levine RPG came out, he pulled the Vita out of his pocket and said, "We're doing this. It's a thing." And then it never happened.
And it never happened, of course. I would like to see that game come into fruition. I'm really curious of like how you would go about this. I would almost think it would be probably in the middle between like the breakdown of Rapture between like humans and then like the daddies or whatever with the little sisters. I could see tons of variety in soldiers and powers. It's very XCOM like. That would be super cool. And Rapture is just like a fantastic like atmosphere and level design with that type of game. I see all these different types of XCOM like games, and now I'm picturing in my mind with Rapture. It's just like, that's perfect to do it. And I wish they did it on Vita, but I guess
we were so close, Garrett. We were so close to that reality where we would have had the BioShock Vita game. That would have been so good. And actually, one in the same vein that came to me while you were talking about BioShock, and this also would be like a strategy RPG, something like a Shining Force or a Fire Emblem. I would love to see a StarCraft or Warcraft like turn-based strategy RPG. I think that would be amazing because you've already have so many amazing heroes both in the Warcraft universe but also in the StarCraft universe. And I don't care which one they pick because I love Blizzard games. I would play either one of them. I think they would be amazing. But if I had to pick one, probably StarCraft because I think that would be awesome. Like I think just seeing like the different, especially with like the different types of units you already see in StarCraft, because some of them use guns, but some of them are melee units, and you kind of have this nice balance already of melee attacks and ranged attacks, which you already see in games like Fire Emblem between like, archers and fighters and stuff like that. So I think that would be a series that would be a really interesting like strategy RPG would be something like StarCraft or Warcraft, especially because they already come from the strategy roots. So maybe make them a little bit more turn-based and, slow them down a little bit. I think that would be really interesting. All right. Last question comes to us from Seanathan, not to be confused with Sean. And he asks, the addition of RPG elements to various games has been a great trend in the past few years. Has there been any games that you have found that have been hindered by their RPG elements rather than helping them? I personally preferred Assassin's Creed before they added RPG elements to the series. Garrett, what do you think about this question?
It's a very good question. I really have to like dive deep in there. But the main thing about addition of RPG elements to games, most of the time, if that's not the central thing about it, then it feels like fluff. It feels like just bloatiness that the developers kind of just needed to add into it to give it some sort of value, some sort of worth. And Assassin's Creed is a very, I would say like a good example. I would argue saying that like it probably didn't like actually destroy the franchise, right? It's the best selling so far right now. But I do tend to agree with you. There's a lot of side systems in Assassin's Creed and also like Far Cry or like Watch Dogs. I mean, it's part of the Ubisoft formula where you find question marks all around the map. All right, you have to go to each and every individual one of them. And it's just like, guys, come on, like, let's cut the fat a little bit.
Yeah.
I can still pay $60 for you for a good, very great 20 to 30 hour type of game, and don't give me 100 hour of just bloatiness that I don't really want to get into. I'm more of a completionist, but the thing is, I don't have exorbitant amount of time to play games, so it's really rough on me when I see 50 or 60,000 question marks on the map and I just can't get to each and every one of them.
Especially with a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where that's like a 70-hour game if you go as fast as possible to beat that game. Like it's because Sean and I were talking about this on the Xbox Drive, where I essentially reviewed Watch Dogs Legion, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and Immortals Phoenix Rising basically back to back for the show.
So
and
rough.
I beat all three of those games in like the span of a month and a half, and It was the worst, Garrett, because it was just like,
I bet your brain was melted. It's like,
I
where's
was
the
like,
question
I
marks?
can't do open games for at least a month, you guys. I can't deal with this anymore. It's too much. It's too much Ubisoft in one thing. And again, going back now, here's the thing though. I would actually disagree with Seanathan. Where actually, I was not a person that was really interested in Assassin's Creed at all, really, until the RPG elements came into it, where we started seeing that kind of creep its way in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which was kind of the game that really brought me into the Assassin's Creed series. I'd played every single Assassin's Creed game before that, wanting to like the series, because it was a series I really wanted to enjoy, but for whatever reason, the balance wasn't there for me to actually want to do that. Whereas with Syndicate, with the RPG elements, it wasn't because of the RPG elements that brought me in, but I felt like those games really started to feel more and more like BioWare games as the series went on, especially with Odyssey. Like, that game feels like a game that was built by like the Dragon Age team at BioWare.
That's so true.
Like, it doesn't feel like a Ubisoft game in a lot of ways, even though it has like the Ubisoft open map stuff. It feels very different from those games. So I would be on the other side of the fence and not argue that, but I have a couple choices here. My first one, and is a real hot take. But bear with me, Garrett.
Oh, no.
So prepare for hot takes here. My first one is Borderlands. I actually think Borderlands would play better without the RPG elements. If it was just a first-person shooter, like a traditional first-person shooter that wasn't so reliant on co-op play and RPG elements, like those two combined factors make it so hard to play by yourself. Like, just, I don't know if you've ever tried to play Borderlands single player, Garrett, but I just can't get into it at all. And I think part of that just has to do with the way the level scaling in the world of Borderlands works, because I don't think it scales correctly. And a lot of that just has to do with the RPG leveling elements, where if it wasn't an RPG and it was more like a traditional first-person shooter, it would be a little bit easier to play through by yourself. Like, it would be more apt for solo play, and that's why I think it might actually be a more accessible game without the RPG elements than with it. Even though I know that's a lot of the hook for people, that's just how I think about Borderlands. Whereas I know, again, a lot of people feel differently about it, but it maybe played with their friends, but maybe didn't try and solo the entire game by themselves. So whereas it's so like it beats you over the head with its level scaling. So I would definitely say that's one. But another one I just talked about, Watch Dogs Legion. That's a game that doesn't need RPG elements at all. And the RPG elements that they added were not good. So it definitely took away from maybe how I felt about the original two Watch Dogs games. I still overall prefer that game over something like Watch Dogs 2, but I think the RPG elements actually hurt the game more than help it. If you know that.
That sounds good. Let's go back to Borderlands, man. That's one of my favorite franchises, by the way.
Of course.
I play a lot of it single player, actually. Now, I can understand Borderlands 1 and 3. 1 was just, it was kind of
and
like
those are the two I'm mostly talking about when I'm referring to this too. I think Borderlands 2, did a much better job of balancing things.
Yes, yeah. Borderlands 3 is just way too complicated. Like, guys, you're going too much on the RPG skill tree or whatever. Yeah. I like how you could just mix it up every now and then. But yeah, when I'm thinking about it more and more, when I play single player Borderlands 2, there's a specific tree I want to go down. And not the two other trees. There's one tree that's like very co-op centric, where it's just like, oh, let's heal the other player as much as we can, or there's companions together. So I can agree with that, but I still would love. I love the skills in there. I do.
Yeah.
I like the elemental damage and the siren.
Well, I think there's a way to do the skill stuff without doing a lot of the RPG stuff. Like, for example, I like the variety of guns, but you don't need that many guns in a game.
No, you don't.
And again, like definitely with Borderlands 1, I think the problem with that was it just felt so grindy like halfway through the game when you're playing by yourself. And then Borderlands 3, like you said, way too complicated with the RPG stuff. So I think Borderlands 2 was definitely the right balance. And I would definitely say of the three, it's definitely the easiest one that I found to get into. Even something like the pre-sequel, I think they did, an okay job.
Yeah, pre-sequel was great too.
Yeah, I think it's just 1 and 3 definitely just... too far with that stuff, and especially if you're playing solo, it's not fun. But anyways, Garrett, that's the end of the show. Before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
You can follow me on Twitter at Bland Explosion, and you can also follow me on Twitch. I streamed once last weekend. That was fun.
Oh my god, it happened!
Yeah, I played Monster Hunter Rise. I may play some more tomorrow. We'll see. So I tend to go on Sundays whenever I have time. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitch at Bland Explosion as well.
Very nice, my friend. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You also find us on Twitter at the RPG Cave now. We're on Twitter right now. You also find us on YouTube. Just search for us on YouTube because we don't have a URL yet. We're also on podcast services around the globe. So for Garrett Bland, I am Ryan Turford. This has been level 2 of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye.